I'll just say it again. This is the final session of Friday, and it's a very rare moment when you can organise something in a diary and find out whether Eve Ensler is available, and it happens to be that she is. Because Eve Ensler is, first of all, somebody who spends her life travelling in order to make change happen. And she goes to many places. She's wanted in many places, not as a criminal, you understand, but as an activist. And she's, if there was something called the United Nations of Women, she'd probably be the president. But she'd probably eschew the title on the grounds that really collective action is what she absolutely has always believed in. When she created the Vagina Monologues, which is a long time ago now, I mean, I can remember as a theatre person being staggered, really at the wonderful, joyful audacity that she conjured for all of us about the idea that not only would this word vagina be used once, but it would be used many, 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 many times. And funny enough, you still don't hear it very often. You know, I don't hear Jeremy Paxman using that very often, but that's his loss. I think that Eve joyfully, and I use that word deliberately because she gives across such a sense of possibility and happiness, but her using that word so vigorously and joyfully allowed so many women to actually begin the journey of thinking, do you know what, it's great being a woman with parts. And the thing about the Vagina Monologues, it's not only travelled across the world in an amazing way, both as done by a small number of actresses to a huge event we had here at Alchemy last year when Indian and British Indian actresses put on Vagina Monologues. I think there were 75 of them in the cast. But she's used the proceeds of that, which is £85 million, to fund all sorts of grassroots projects around the world. And that's what I mean about, you know, United Nations of Women. It's such an extraordinary thing to have done. It almost defies description, because I can't think of anybody else who's operated in that way. She has brought to our attention some of the truly dreadful issues that are happening in the Congo that we're all aware of, but in a way find it too difficult to face up to. And in the face of many of us feeling so inept and so powerless to do anything about something so ongoing and tragic and brutal, she's managed to make us feel that there are things we can do, there are actions that can be taken, there is a future for those women, and there is also possible redemption for other people involved in that conflict. But I will leave her to talk about her work. We're so grateful that she's here. In a way, you know, the WOW Festival is epitomised by everything that Eve does and is. Eve Ensler.
Thank you. And thank you, Jude. I've just been walking around this amazing festival, and I just want to take a minute to just say what an amazing, incredible thing Jude has done here. It's incredible, just incredible. Really. And it's just so great to see so many different women doing so many different things under the same tent, in the same place. And it's such a hard thing to do, and I know the time and the energy and the love that's required to do it. So bravo, bravo, bravo. I'm very happy to be here tonight, and you know, particularly in a room with activists and powerful women and men. If there are any men here, are there no men here? Are there men here? Yay, yay, brave man, thank you. It's the height of V-Day season, so I've been traveling around the world in all kinds of places, and I've been waking up in the mornings actually not knowing where I am. But I know that there are vaginas involved, and that's all that matters. And I just want to say to new friends and old friends who are here, I'm just so happy to be here in London. I actually just want to say that 2 nights ago I was at the European Parliament, and I want to begin there because it's just so amazing what happened there. There were 9 MEPs that performed the Vagina Monologues in the European Parliament, and it was amazing. It was truly amazing. And one of the things that happened, you know, parliaments can be stodgy places and uptight places and places where people don't really connect with each other, as we know. And, it's very patriarchal and very bureaucratic and very distant. And when we came in, there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, but mainly women, in the parliament. So first of all, that was just amazing. Then the energy was like vagina energy. It was just everywhere. And there were so many people there that they had an overflow room, so it ended up being like 500 people in the parliament. There were tons of press, so much so when I went backstage, the women MEPs were putting on their makeup and all the paparazzi were filming the members of parliament putting on their makeup to do the Vagina Monologues. It was like, I felt like I was in a dream. And then they performed it. And they were, first of all, so brilliant. They all did it in second languages, from Portuguese, women from Germany. It was a staggering performance. And at the end, when the group of them were all doing a group orgasm together at the parliament, I thought, the world has changed. The world has changed. It was amazing. And one of the things the press kept saying to me is, well, what do you feel about this? How do you feel about this? And I said, well, how do you feel? What does it feel like to be in the parliament right now? Like, what has changed? It feels warm. It feels inviting. It feels like we're in a circle as opposed to up and down. It feels like we're included. It feels like we're all in charge. We're all invited. It's our story. It's a little sweaty. It's delicious. And all the press kind of went, yeah. That's what it feels like here. Like, the energy of this place is completely shifted. And what was wonderful is to see the attention paid to violence against women and to see it kind of break through both a denial and indifference that has kind of reigned in the European Parliament, but all parliaments across the world. And now I have challenged the women in the US Congress and Senate to do the same. And yesterday I got a text from one of them saying she had already gathered 6 women who had said yes and a list of maybes. So I feel like, okay, we're moving forward. I think this year in V-Day has been one of our it's definitely our most exciting year. And there are 5,400 events occurring over this 2-month period in 1,800 places on the planet, ranging from Qatar to Alabama. And I was just in New York last week where they did Vaginas Occupy, where all these amazing women who were activists at Occupy Wall Street put the whole thing together, and they had this banner that just said Vaginas Occupy, and all these amazing women who are part of the 99%, from domestic workers to social workers, performed the play in New York, and it was gorgeous. There were hundreds of people there, and we mic checked. Do you all know what mic check is? We mic checked the orgasm at the end, and it was fantastic. I also heard that a group of women ministers performed it in Ontario, Canada, that there's a whole group of seminarians doing it next week. There are migrant workers Asian migrant workers in London doing it. The range and diversity of women this year is fantastic, and I feel like we have a solid movement across the planet that is growing and growing and growing. We are also focusing right now on where things are very, very, very difficult, particularly in Libya and in Sudan, Afghanistan, Haiti, Congo, and Somalia. And as a matter of fact, I don't know if everyone is aware of the kind of sexual violence that occurred, and it has occurred in Libya, but it's been highly underreported because to report it is so dangerous that reporting it can get women killed. And there are fantastic women doing very, very powerful, necessary, urgent work with survivors, and I'm very happy that V-Day is supporting them. And if you're interested later to find out how you can do that, please, tell me, because there are incredible crimes that occurred during this last period of unrest and war, and women were on the front lines of that, and it's not getting talked about, even though I know this particular group is dealing with 200 survivors, and there are 3,000 who are waiting. And obviously, there are similar stories in Sudan and in Somalia. Somalia is also under siege, and rape is completely rampant there as well. We've launched I'm going to talk more about Congo later because I have good news from Congo, even though there is still bad news going on there. We've launched a V-Girls program around the world and to empower girls based on Emotional Creature, which some of you heard some of the monologues from earlier. And I was really thrilled that we were able to start the play in Johannesburg last summer at the Market Theater. We had the most extraordinary cast of young women who began the play to discover the play. We work with a brilliant musician who created music, so it's now pretty much a musical, but we're calling it a play with music. And we had a cast of 7 astounding young teenage girls who rocked South Africa and rocked the Market Theater. And we had schools that came every morning, and by the end of each performance, usually the schools were dancing on the stage with the girls. I want to tell one story from there, because I think it's indicative of what I hope and dream will happen with the V-Girls movement, which is already thousands of girls online who are becoming self-empowered philanthropists and activists who are reaching out around the world. But there was a particular girl, Karabo, who came to audition, and she was really talented and was a hip-hop spoken word artist and did a brilliant audition, and she kind of came in with her cap, and I didn't know at the beginning if she was a girl and a boy, because she's been living her life pretty much as a boy, as she told me later. And we cast her, and as I was casting, I was hearing lots of story in South Africa about something called corrective rape, which is a practice, a horrible practice, being committed on women who are thought to be lesbians to correct them. And hundreds of women have suffered from this heinous practice, and some have been murdered in the process. 1 out of 2 women right now in South Africa are getting raped. 1 out of 2. The rapes are astronomical. There's literally a war being waged on women's bodies there. And when I met Karabo, during the first days of rehearsal, she talked about her own story, and I am been given license to talk about this from her, where she was raped when she was 9, and when she was 11, and when she was 14. And that had totally just messed up her head and messed up her heart, messed up her life, messed her up. And she told me that she had made a conscious decision to live as a boy because she couldn't afford to live as a girl anymore. It was too vulnerable, it was too risky, and so that is what she was doing. And I ended up writing her a piece based on a lot of different things I was hearing, and just this whole idea of corrective rape, and also where racism and colonialism and poverty and all these issues intersect now, and where women's bodies become the landscape and the battleground on which so many of those issues are now revealing themselves and being fought. And she ended up performing this piece so brilliantly. It was a hip-hop spoken word piece, and we put to music. And when she performed it, people would literally break down sobbing in the audience, and people would just, it was so incredible. But as she performed it, she began to change, because we know the power of theater, and that's one of the things I want to talk about tonight. She began to be transformed. She began to be a different, open, more vulnerable, more real, more realized person. And she just kept getting happier and happier and happier as the play went on, and actually a little bit more feminine. And I said to her, you can't get too much more feminine, because by the end of this, you're going to be wearing heels and lipstick, and I did not write that for that character, you know. But the last day of performance, I went backstage and all the girls were crying, which they did often because they are emotional creatures. And I said, what's going on? And Karabo came out of the dressing room and she said, you're never going to believe it, Mom, I just got my period. She was 19 and she had never had her period because she had actually, on some psychological level, prevented it from coming. And she said, I never believed until now that I could be a girl. But I'm a girl, and I'm really happy being a girl. And I'm in a posse of other girls who've made me safe and doing a play where I found my voice, and I'm now bleeding. And for me, that was such a metaphor of everything, of the story of how we cancel out our girlness, our womanness, our power, our blood, our life force, our everything because of the violence that's surrounding us. And she went on to perform the play in Paris and just rocked Paris, and is now an amazing activist and doing incredible work with the other girls from South Africa. They just did a huge march in Johannesburg where they wore short skirts, they were eco skirts that said mine on them, and they walked down the streets and reclaimed the streets. I am very happy that we are finally launching a men's piece A group of amazing V-men have been working for 2 years now on a parallel piece that can be performed by men in colleges and all the places that the Vagina Monologues goes. And I am so excited to think we may have an ally movement finally after many, many years. And I see this happening in a lot of other places, the White Ribbon Campaign, and there's a lot of other great men's groups that are now beginning to spring up and really speak out and do some very powerful work. Anyway, that piece is going to be ready probably in the fall. And I think really what I'm most excited about is Congo, and I want to talk a little bit about Congo tonight. I think in some ways Congo, for me, when I went to Congo, which was almost 5 years ago now, I was invited at the bequest of an extraordinary man named Dr. Denis Mukwege, who is an OBGYN at the Panzi Hospital in Bukavu. And he's an extraordinary man. He's devoted his life to the women of Congo and has been there for the last 13 years in the heart of the deadliest conflict on the planet, really, where 6 million people have died and over 500,000. We don't know how many women. I have to tell you, I have yet to meet a woman in Bukavu who has not suffered some kind of sexual violence. This war, as most of you know, is a war fought for minerals. It's a war fought for coltan and copper and tin and gold and all the minerals that live in a very resource-rich country called the Democratic Republic of Congo. And often militias are sent in as proxies for Western corporations and governments to do their dirty work. They come from usually outside countries, from Uganda, from Rwanda, from Burundi, and they end up in different forms and different militias, taking over villages, coming into people's homes, raping mothers in front of their children, raping wives in front of their husbands, forcing husbands to rape their daughters, doing acts that are so beyond the imagination and grotesque that, honestly, the first time I went to the Congo, I had met Dr. Mukwege in New York. I had been asked to interview him by the UN, and when I met him, I just couldn't believe there was a person on the planet who was not only witnessing the suffering that he was witnessing, but showing up every single day in some major way, 8 to 10 to 12 hours a day to heal and sew up women's vaginas as fast as the militias were ripping them apart. And he asked if Vide would come and help, and we went, and I went. And my first time in Bukavu, I spent weeks just listening to stories, and I have to tell you, that experience was the most shattering experience of my life. I will never be the same. I don't think I could ever be the same or want to be the same, because when you witness that level of atrocity and you see what is happening in this century in front of all of us, where we all have information with this kind of world indifference, it's so hard to believe that you really can't do anything but think about that. And I heard stories that I knew by hearing those stories that if we allowed what was happening in the Congo to continue without doing something seriously to support the Congolese, to empower, to have their own destinies and take back their own country, that we would see the spread of this kind of destruction of women throughout the world. Because really, the destruction of women in war and using women's body is the cheapest form of destruction. You don't have to buy a Scud missile, you don't even have to buy a gun, all you need is a machete. And you destroy women, you destroy the culture, you destroy the family, families flee, they leave their homes, they leave their villages, and the people come and take over the mines. And we're seeing that getting duplicated in other places now because there hasn't been justice, nobody's been held accountable in Congo. So there's kind of an unconscious global license now to be able to treat women like this. And we're seeing it in Somalia, and we're seeing it in Sudan, and we're seeing it in Libya, and we're seeing it, across the world. We began really working in the DRC 5 years ago with the lead of the Women on the Ground, which is the only way Vide works. Vide doesn't really exist except as a concept, and there's only 12 paid staff people around the world, and everybody works from their home with a computer. We don't really exist except that if you want to be Vide, you are Vide, and if you want to bring Vide into your world, then you are Vide, and if you decide you're a V, you're a V, and that's how it is. And the women in Congo basically said what they wanted was to launch a massive campaign across the country where they would educate and they would invigorate and they would really teach women what their rights were and help women break the silence and talk about the sexual violence that was happening. And so for 3 years, we supported and loved and worked with the women in Congo who launched an extraordinary campaign, Stop Raping Our Greatest Resource, Power to the Women of the DRC. And across the country, women were educated and women spoke out in front of hundreds of people, and survivors told their stories for the first time. And there really began to be change. We then said, what else? And the women said, what we want most is a place we can go to, a place where we're safe, and a place where we can become leaders. And I'm going to share my own point of view about how change happens. You know, I think, I was thinking of this Coney 2012 video that's circulating right now, and I think obviously we don't want war criminals leading the world, and we want war criminals arrested, and that is crucial. But unfortunately, that is not going to be the thing that stops women from being raped. What stops women from being raped is when women come into power and leadership, and they begin to direct the countries that they live in. That's what will stop women from being raped. I can't say that strongly enough. You can remove one warlord, but behind him will be another, because the patriarchy is still in place. And until we deconstruct patriarchy, we will be here forever, forever. So one of the things that the women of Congo instinctively knew is that what they needed to do was to find a way to begin to rule and direct the destiny of their own country. That for so many years, everybody in the world has come into Congo to determine what happens there, whether it's the Belgians who came and took everything and killed 20 million people and chopped off people's wrists and took the rubber and raped the women and destroyed, I think 20 million people died during that period. They have always been under someone's thumb, under someone else's determination. And what they said is, we want a place that's ours, where we're safe, where we can learn, where we can grow, where we can direct our own destinies. So we built over 2 years, this amazing place called the City of Joy. And it was the craziest thing we've ever embarked on. We essentially built a city of love and joy in the middle of a war zone. But it seemed so radically outrageous that it was like the perfect thing to do. It's like saying vagina at the parliament. You know, I think you have to go so extreme in one direction now in order to break through the consciousness and the madness. Because, and I'm not talking about violently extreme, I think you have to just go extremely with your heart and open in a big, 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 big way in the face of madness, because something incredible begins to happen. And it's nothing one can explain in a linear, let me say, you go from here to here to here to here, you just have a feeling about it and you move towards it. And the women wanted this place, and I am proud to say that they were very much a part of it being built. It was the first time women construction workers were ever hired in the DRC, and they were half of the team that built it. So much so that they formed their own NGO at the end of it called the Friends of V-Day, and they're all now builders and planters and gardeners, and they insisted that they stay at City of Joy because it was theirs. So we hired them, and they now are this uber mamas who nurture and feed and love and garden and take care of the women survivors who stay there. And it's just this beautiful story because they built it and now they're nurturing it. And I mean, Lynn was talking about seeds and gardens, and everything about City of Joy is about the principle of gardens. I think it's just this one amazing lotus that's growing out of the mud. And you know, the more pain that people throw at it, the more beautiful the flower becomes, because the women of Congo are so fierce and so beautiful and so ready to have a revolution. And we opened it in February under much stress. The building process was very, very difficult. You can imagine what it's like to build in a place where there's no infrastructure, where there is nothing there. Everything has to come from the outside, where there are rainy seasons that are like monsoons, where there's no roads. Once that happens, there's no water, there's no electricity most of the time. But we built it. We built it. And it is truly one of the most gorgeous places I've ever seen. And we opened it in February, and we had our first pilot group of 42 women. When they came, most of the women who came from the bush. Very, very poor women, as most of the women in Congo are. Most of the women had never seen a bathroom before. One woman said the other day in the new group, "I've arrived in paradise, there's a toilet," and she just started crying. These women are my teachers and my mentors. When they arrived, there were many of them who had been through such atrocities that they no longer had reproductive parts. There were women who had fistula. There was a nun who had a bullet hole in her head, where she had been captured at her nunnery, and all of the nuns in her nunnery were murdered, and she somehow survived, and she fought off her rapists, and they shot her in her head. When she arrived, she was half crazy. She was very aggressive. She didn't sleep at night. She screamed. As a matter of fact, there's a most disturbing and amazing story that there were many women there having horrible nightmares when they first arrived. Obviously, they're severely traumatized women. And there are a lot of myths in Congo, and people were starting to talk about the women being possessed until they really came to understand what trauma was and that they were traumatized. And over the 6 months that they have been there, they had an extraordinary process. The City of Joy is owned by the Congolese, it's directed by the Congolese, and only Congolese women work there and men work there. It is all about the Congolese women and people determining their own destiny and creating their own path and empowering themselves with resources from the rest of us. And I really feel like that's the model, like how do we send our love and energy so that people can take over their own destinies and we get out of their way and don't determine their futures, and we don't determine who gets killed by whom, we let them determine what they want to do. I know for me, when people tell me what to do, it really pisses me off. And I think when people come, you know when you're crying and someone says, you shouldn't cry, or when you're crying and someone says, let me tell you what you should do, you just want them to go away. But when you're crying and someone says, can I just hold your hand while you're crying, you get strength and you feel better and you feel empowered because they're not getting in your process, they're just sitting by your process. I think that's what most people need in the world. They just need someone to sit with them when they cry. They don't need to be told what to do. Anyway, I was at the graduation. Okay, so what they've done in 6 months is this. They had an amazing therapy process, which is only group therapy because everything in the Congolese culture is in groups. There are 10 guiding principles that are kind of like the mantras of City of Joy, and tell the truth, tell your story, use it to fuel the revolution, give what you want the most, treat your sister's life as if it were your own. And it is amazing to see how deeply the women have imbibed those principles and how they live them every single day, to the point where I see fights going on where I'll hear a woman say, you're just being a victim. Like, snap out of it. We're not here to be victims. We're leaders. That's why we were chosen. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. And I'll be like, oh, my God. I mean, I don't hear this in the West, by the way. Over the time, they had amazing therapy. They had civics courses, communication courses. They all went home to vote and were supported to go home to vote during the elections for the first time. They have all learned self-defense. We have two amazing people named Winnie and Duncan who we've supported for 10 years in Kenya, who have a program called the Anti-Rape Dolphin Program. And they train girls in Kenya to learn how to fight off their rapists. And they've been very successful at doing that. And we brought them to Congo, and they trained the women in self-defense. And it was one of the most powerful things I've ever been a part of, to watch women survivors in Congo learning how to defend themselves. They have learned incredible skills. They've learned to read and write. Many of them have learned to speak English. At the graduation, there were hundreds and hundreds of people, and I literally could not speak to see the transformation of where women were 6 months earlier and where they'd become. They were gorgeous, they were poised, they were brilliant. They gave speeches without ever picking up a piece of paper. They spoke to the governor, to his face. They spoke directly. They spoke eloquently, better than any member of parliament I've ever heard. They danced. They did fashion shows. They did poetry in English without even looking at a piece of paper. It was literally a miracle. And we all saw the future of Congo before our eyes. And they have now left. They have returned to their villages. Each of them left with a posse and a group. They left with a cell phone and $100. We've heard from most of them, just about all of them. They are now infiltrating their communities. They are speaking in churches, speaking on the radio. They are holding groups. They are teaching what they've learned. They learned agriculture. They learned composting. They're spreading all these eco values that they learned about the land. So we're off and running. we're off and running. And we now have the next group. There are 90 women now, and there'll be 90 women every 6 months that will graduate. But I think what is really exciting to me about what we've seen at City of Joy is I've always known, because I've spent the last 14 years of my life with women who have survived enormous brutality and violence, and women who survive, who don't do themselves in, who don't turn it outwards, but women who actually transform their rage, transform their pain, often end up devoting their lives to making sure it doesn't happen to other women. And we've always called these women in VDA Vagina Warriors, women who have found a way to give what they want, to take care of people in the way they wish that they were taken care of. And you can't buy a vagina warrior. You can't talk a vagina warrior out of being a vagina warrior. You can't because they're in it for one reason, which is to stop what happened to them. That's why they're the best leaders, because they're devoted from their body, from their vagina, from their core to ending something. And what we're graduating now every 6 months is 90 vagina warriors who are completely devoted, completely fierce, completely loving, and completely clear what they have to do and want to do in the world, which is to stop the violence and to transform their country into a place of peace. And I was just talking to Christine, I talk to her every day, who's the incredible director, Christine Schuler, Describer. And I was on the phone with her today because every day she tells me the updates and the stories. And she was saying that the women, the 90 women, were dancing in this tent. They have dance and workout sessions every day because we know that when you've been traumatized, if you move and you make noise and you dance, it's an incredibly powerful way to release your trauma. And she said the women were all dancing and it was really hot. And one of the women said, it's too hot. And she just took off her shirt. And then she said all the women just started taking off their shirts. And she said before she knew it, there were 90 naked women dancing madly in a tent. And she said, Eve, if you don't think the revolution's coming, you are wrong, you know? And that was just like the best news. And I'm really thrilled to say that we've been really, you know, I've been thinking for a long time about how we support, again, women taking their own destinies into their own hands, and what we've really been dreaming about is getting land so that women can develop the land, have the land, make the land, and really put emo and eco together. That as we heal women's bodies, we heal the earth, and we understand that you can't rape either, and that the rape of one is the rape of everything. If you rape a woman, you rape the future. If you rape the land, you rape the future. And so we have been able to purchase, we're in the process of purchasing this amazing farm, which is the size of Central Park. It's enormous. And we'll be able to grow everything there. There's tilapia farming and pig farming and rice and corn and honey. And it really is like a feminist utopia. It really is. I mean, I remember reading that book, Herland, and always thinking, that's really where I want to live. And it is her land. We're going to create her land there. And what we hope is that in 5 years, we'll be able to, you know, women will be able to produce enough food and enough products there to sustain City of Joy and to begin to train women who will leave City of Joy and come there afterwards. The women who can't return to their villages because of insecurity can come and live there. We can bring women from all over the world and have it be a sanctuary where women can heal by working in the fields. There's all kinds of visions that are beginning to develop, but it's very, very exciting to see that there'll be step 2. And then what we hope is that we'll have a template, like this world that we've created for survivors, which we can duplicate if women want it and if women desire it all around the world. And we're getting requests every day from all kinds of places where people say, I want my City of Joy. Can you bring City of Joy here? So hopefully that will happen. I just wanted to talk a little bit about theater, because I've been thinking a lot about theater, how much I love the theater, and how much theater has been an activator and can be an activator of human rights. And all my life, I've kind of done this necessary dance between being an artist and being an activist. And when I was younger, frankly, I was obsessed and frankly very pained by these two equally strong currents that were running in me. One to create and the other to transform suffering in the world. And they seemed at odds, to be honest. I didn't know how to create as a playwright, characters free to be themselves without my personal political agenda and intruding voice of my didactic self on top of those playwrights. And to be honest, at the beginning of my career, I was a pretty lousy playwright because I was exactly that. I was didactic and forceful, and I fail at it quite often because of it. But what I realized after I wrote this play called The Depot, it was during the Reagan administration, and Ronald Reagan was declaring a nuclear war winnable. I don't know if you all remember that, but I hold him personally responsible for the destruction of the world, along with Margaret Thatcher. I think they did it in partnership. And he was declaring a nuclear war winnable. At the same time, he was saying that ketchup was a real food and the homeless should just eat ketchup. And I was insane and consumed with nuclear nightmares. And it was the time of Greenham Common, and I had met a woman who was camping at Greenham Common, and all of you here remember Greenham Common, I'm sure. And they were threatening to bring nuclear weapons into the harbors of Staten Island and Stapleton. And so we started to form these peace camps in the New York City parks and to protest them. And I met at that time an extraordinary woman named Joanne Woodward, who is an amazing actress and was a real activist. And I was in love with her. I had been in love with her my whole life. She was like my dream mentor. She had made this movie called Sybil, where she took care of this multiple personality girl who climbed into her lap all the time, and she would always call her sweetie. And I mean, Sybil was a very disturbed girl, but I identified with her deeply. And I always dreamed that Joanne Woodward would come into my life and call me sweetie. It was just a fantasy, and then she did. It was just like one of those weird things. And when I met her, I gave her a play, and she said, I like this play, and she brought it to her class, and I was very young, and then I had a moment of incredible chutzpah, and I want to say to all the young women here, have a moment of chutzpah. Have a moment of incredible bravery that you astound yourself, because that will be the moment where you change your life. Ask the question. Say, I want the job. I want to do this. I want to write this. I want to be in your play. Just ask it, because you'll never know what happens as a result of that. Is that incredible moment where you just open your mouth and someone says yes and you go yes, you know? I ask her, it's really, really important. And don't let anyone talk you out of it, because people will always talk you out of it. They'll say, don't be rude, don't get up, just do it, just do it, just step up. So I said to Joanne Woodward in a real moment of chutzpah, could I write you a play? I know that you're very involved in the nuclear disarmament movement, and so am I, and so could I do that? And she said, well, you could write me a speech. Why don't we begin with the speech? So I wrote her a speech, and she liked the speech, and so I said, I have this vision that I write you this play of a woman camping at a peace camp, and she said, go ahead and write it. So I wrote her the play, and I remember I delivered the play, and I was so nervous, I was literally sweat like under my arms, and I went home, and she called me up a week later, and she called me in, and I was just sitting there, and she said, Eve, the character's good, the scene is good, but I want to tell you I'm not Vanessa Redgrave, I'm not Jane Fonda, I want it funny. And I said, funny? You want me to make nuclear war funny? And she said, yeah, you're funny, go make it funny. And for me, that was the beginning of my life, because somebody had given me a direction and an instruction, which was a way of bringing politics and art together. Funny. There was the key, funny. And I went home and I worked on this play called The Depot for her, and I made it funny. And she decided she didn't want to be in it, but she would direct it. And we got this extraordinary actress named Shirley Knight, and she directed Shirley Knight, and we performed that play. We toured America during the nuclear whole anti-nuke movement, and we performed it in schools, and we performed it in military academies where people threw things at Shirley and booed her, and she kept going. And we performed it on the Nevada test site where we all got arrested while we were performing it. We performed it everywhere. But it was the beginning of my life. First of all, I was working with two amazing mentors, and that's the other second B. First, step up and have a moment of chutzpah. Two, find people who will mentor you and believe in you. You only need one or two people. You only need one or two people to believe in you. You just need somebody who is in your corner, somebody who says, I know you can do this, you have talent, you have a vision, I'll be behind you. You just need one benefactor, you just need one person who loves you to death, that's all. But that person you have to find that one person. And Joanne Woodward was really that person for me, and so was Shirley. And they were great women of the theater, they were brilliant, they were talented, and they taught me so much. And through that experience of touring the country with them for a few years, I began to see that I could put those two things together, art and activism. And as a result, I wrote another play called Ladies, which was a play about homeless women, because as I said, it was at the same time as Reagan, and there were thousands of homeless people on the streets of New York. And that play eventually got done, and we were able to raise a lot of money for homeless women. Around that time, or shortly after that, the war in Bosnia happened, and I was able to go through getting a grant, and I went and I spent months living at a center for women war victims in Zagreb, Croatia, interviewing women war victims and survivors. And I think that experience really was the experience that changed everything for me, because of course I knew at that point that there was violence against women on the planet. Of course I knew I was a survivor myself of incredible brutality and rape by my own father. I knew, but I had no idea the epidemic proportions, and I had no idea what was happening to women in war. And that firsthand accounting and that staying for months in going to refugee camps and going to centers and traveling all over the former Yugoslavia awakened me to what I really felt I needed to do with my life. And I ended up writing a play called Necessary Targets that got done. First, it got done, it was this amazing reading that Meryl Streep ended up doing on Broadway for the President of Bosnia and for the Secretary of State, and then later it was done for Secretary Clinton. It was First Lady Clinton at that time. And what was more astounding was it ended up being performed at the National Theater of Sarajevo. And it was performed by Glenn Close and Marissa Tomei with 6 other Bosnian actors who had learned how to speak English just by learning the syllabic pronunciations. And they performed it for 800 women refugees and survivors who had come back to Sarajevo for the first time since the war. And I began that night, I saw what theater could do. I saw what happened when 800 refugees mirrored back their stories and heard their own pain and heard their own suffering and were realized and were legitimized and were made real and made whole and made something. And I think that has really what led to the Vagina Monologues, obviously. And when the Vagina Monologues happened, I suddenly got, after I began to travel with the play, every place I went, women would line up. And at first I thought, well, this is great. They're going to tell me about their wonderful sex lives and their fantastic orgasms. There's a woman here tonight who's doing traveling the world doing the story of orgasms, which I so love. And I thought maybe people will be telling me, but what really happened was women lined up to tell me how they'd been beaten or raped or incested or destroyed. And I was, to be honest with you, having a nervous breakdown because I couldn't keep hearing the stories without doing anything. And I was going to stop performing Vagina Monologues because I felt immoral the way a war photographer feels when he keeps taking or she keeps taking pictures of people dying and doesn't intervene on their behalf. So in 1998, we got a group of women together and we said, how could we use this play to end violence against women, to end it, not to keep imagining and continuing and carving out space for it, but to actually stop it. And we came up with V-Day, which was Valentine's Day, Vagina Day, Victory Over Violence Day, and we put on one performance in New York thinking it would be that, one performance where we'd raise money for lots of local groups who work to stop violence against women. And 2,500 people came, and every amazing actor in the world, from Glenn Close to Lily Tomlin to Susan Sarandon to everybody agreed to do the show. And I'll never forget that night because nobody had ever said vagina like that on stage before, and everyone was terrified. And I remember they were holding each other's hands backstage, watching it on a monitor, and anytime anyone succeeded, they'd be like, yes, okay, I can do it. And then they'd go out, and they would all cheer each other. I have never seen actors be more supportive of each other in my entire life. And that night was an amazing, really an amazing night, and it really launched V-Day. And again, the power of theater. There was energy in that theater that night. There was like a wall being broken through. You could feel something literally shifting. And what happened is each person who walked out of the audience took something and took it somewhere. One woman said, I want to bring this to colleges. One person said, I want to make vagina pajamas. One person said, I want to bring this to Pakistan. And they all did it. Women just, because that's how women are. women just take it and do. They take it and get it done. They take it and get it done. Look at Jude. Look what she's done here. A perfect example. Every room is filled. There's 1,000 million things happening. And because Jude made it happen. That's what happens. And I think that's the energy of V-Day, is activists coming and say, I want to do this, I want to take it here. I want to do this, I want to bring it here. And before we knew it, the movement spread, and it spread, and it spread to 140 countries. It spread fast, and it spread the way a good vagina virus spreads. It just spread. And I have to say, since that time, I have obviously talked about vaginas a lot, and I always joke about the fact that, you know, since the first time a woman told me her vagina tale, I feel like I've been sucked down like the vagina path, and I haven't gotten off it. But I will also say that in the process of that, I have witnessed things that no one would believe. And sometimes I'm just starting to archive them, because I've seen the president of Iceland stand up and declare himself the first vagina-friendly president. I saw the Labor Party women perform it at the Labor Party conference. I've seen the governor of South Kivu wear a V-Men's t-shirt and stand up and say, I am with the vaginas in, you know, Congo. I have seen in Manila nuns sitting in an audience of thousands of people as women were screaming, "Puke, puke," and the nuns standing up and saying, yes, yes. You know, and I think all these things have happened because it's theatrical, because it's theater, because it's art. When we talk about things, we get so often into these polarized positions where I'm right, you're wrong, I know better. Even just the way we talk to each other on the net, through the internet sometimes, people are so negative and so cynical and so critical and so harsh with each other. It's all positional, and it's all I'm right and you're an idiot, and I think we just get used to this way of behaving. But when you're in the theater, something else happens. And mainly because people tell stories. And when you tell stories, they break open that cynical consciousness, because it's personal and it's specific and it happened to you and it's real. And suddenly you make yourself vulnerable, and then other people make themselves vulnerable, and then we all come into the same room. And one person's not on top and someone's not on bottom, but we're all actually owning the fact that we're in this big human struggle of which we're all trying to find our way, and that we're all very lost. I want to share one other story just about theater, and it has to do with prison. I basically was invited through circumstances to write a feature film about women in prison, and the feature film really got sidetracked because I fell in love with the women in prison and decided to do a group there because I just wanted to be with them. And I ended up running a writing group in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for 5 years with women who had committed violent crimes. That means murder, most of them. And of course I had my own impressions about who women in prison were when I began. But obviously as our group went on, very quickly my impressions were radically altered. And most of the women in my group had been there for a very long time and were going to be there for a very long time. And the group became a place where the women wrote and created to uncover why they had committed the crimes they had committed, and to come to responsibility and come to integrity and to come to ownership of what they had done, and to look back in their past to see what had led them to it and why they made the choices they had made, even though most of them never felt like they had a choice. And there were extraordinary women in the group, and they wrote extraordinary pieces. And those pieces ended up getting performed by a group of amazing actors, one of which was, Glenn Close and Rosie Perez. They all actually came to the prison to perform the women's work for the women and for the whole prison. And I'll never forget this moment, again, about theater. There was a very progressive superintendent there, and her name was Elaine Lord, and I really liked this woman a lot. And she was going to let this theater thing happen. And I said, Elaine, we can't do theater unless you turn out the lights, because you can't do theater in the, you have to turn out the lights. And she said, Eve, this is a maximum security prison. And I said, I know that. I understand that. But the truth of the matter is, you said we could do theater here, and that's not real theater. And most of these women are poor women, and they've never been to the theater, and they are entitled to have one theatrical experience. And we went back and forth for weeks. Every day I would just kind of say, yes, theater in the dark, theater in the dark. And she agreed. And we had this amazing theater performance in the dark at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility. But one of the most amazing things that happened was everyone was so worried about the women, revolting. And what ended up happening is the guards, who were all ready, spent their day going around with boxes of Kleenex because everybody was sobbing, including themselves. And again, it taught me about the power of theater to open people's hearts and to move people in other directions than the programmed, expected directions that we think will be moving. And I just want to say I was at prison last week because I went to visit them in New York, and I haven't seen them in a long time. And I was so proud of the group. Half of them have gotten out. Half of them are still there. They have very long terms, ridiculously so, because all of them are transformed women and should be out. But I have to say, we were meeting with a group of all new women, and the group of new women, a lot of long-termers were there, and they said, we're really jealous of the women in your group because they're all happy. And I said, what do you mean? They said, they're all happy. They're in prison, but they're not unhappy. And I said, and they all said it's true. We got rid of our guilt. We got rid of our shame. We got rid of our past when we did the group. We're here, and we don't like it. We have our depressed days, but we're not in misery. And I thought to myself, again, the power of art to transform human suffering, and that we have to trust art and trust that as a form that is equal to any political form that exists. I want to also just say that in terms of miracles, I have seen a lot of policies change because of performances, and I this week was thinking about how vagina in the United States now has become the new meme. It's being used more than, we're in a vagina monologue right now in America. Even there's articles that are called the GOP's Vagina Monologue. I've been reading it, and I think it's not the good kind of vagina monologue, and it's actually a vagina oligarchy that seems to be emerging, I think whenever men in power lose control over directions and create systems where 99% of the people have no food, no work, no economic resources, and 1% have everything, they don't know what to do. And so what they begin to do is go after women because they think they can control our vaginas. They can do something there. And the answer is actually, no, you can't. You can't. And I think one of the great things that's happening in America right now is that women are letting the GOP, vagina oligarchy, know that they can't control our vaginas, that in fact we are awake, and there's many, many, many women, it's 15 years later, who know their vaginas now and aren't going to stand for it. I want to just close by saying, for the last year, I've been possessed by one question, really one single question, which is how do we end violence against women and girls? How do we get to the levels of the psyche where the violence originates and lodges in our DNA? You can change legislation and laws, you can teach people their rights, you can try and end impunity, but unless we change the underlying story, the essential myths, the beliefs and culture, we will never end violence. We have to know why there is violence, and we have to know what function it serves. Emma Goldman, who was the great American anarchist, once said, "Militarism is the bulwark of capitalism." Well, I think that violence against women is the bulwark of sexism. It's the methodology that sustains patriarchy. It essentially sends an ongoing message to women that if you are too alive, too powerful, too sexual, too strong, too desirous, too present, too free, you will be hurt, raped, or murdered. But after thinking about violence all these years, it has become to me clearly that it may be even deeper engraved in our psyches. The story of humans, the trajectory, seems to be an essentially suicidal story. Think how we are destroying the earth that feeds us. Think the mad consumption of resources without regard for the future. Think the many genocides, often family attacking family. Think capitalism, a system of unfettered greed spiraling out of control so that 1% now has the majority of the resources while 99% lives in struggle and squalor. Think violence against women, where the major resource of the planet, women, who literally hold the future in their bodies, are being raped, beaten, gang raped, cut, burned, mutilated in such numbers that it's now estimated that 1 out of 3 women on the planet, 1 out of 3, that is 1 billion women, will be raped or beaten in her lifetime. I wonder a lot what humans are doing here. Certainly breathing the air, being witness to trees and sky and falling in love would be plenty. But we have destroyed the air, and we're chopping down the trees, and we have made love very dangerous. Having had cancer, which is another manifestation of the suicidal impulse, literally sleeping cells in each of us that are activated by toxins in the environment or insane stress, I'm now convinced that what we're meant to be doing here is creating a new story that is about reversing this drive to destroy ourselves. There is not much else I care about right now, and there's not much time. I think it's a very difficult thing to change the suicidal story. It's so deeply entrenched. I was sitting next to a beautiful woman today, and I knew she'd been smoking. And I'm now a crazy anti-smoker. I've become one of those people I detest, I become her. But I just see the ways in which every single day of our lives, whether it's shoving ourselves into pants that are too tight, or forcing ourselves to not eat so we get skinny and hurt our bodies, or smoking, or drinking, or putting ourselves in toxic relationships which we know hurt ourselves. I mean, the levels on which we are self-destructing on a daily basis is astounding. And I think we're in a mess. And Beckett once said, to find a form that accommodates the mess, that is the task of the artist now. This is where the theater comes in again. It can reach us on a whole other level. It can shake us at our roots, move us, shatter us, and rip us open. It can get us to laugh at ourselves and forgive ourselves and challenge ourselves and reimagine ourselves. It puts forward another language, another way of seeing, and it actually gets us to see what is right in front of us and touch what we do not want to touch. It penetrates our denial. It can disrupt the ordinary by dramatizing it. Ionesco once said that drama lies in the extreme exaggeration of the feelings, an exaggeration that dislocates flat everyday reality. And Stoppard said, I think that theater ought to be theatrical. Shuffling the pack in different ways so that there's always some kind of ambush involved in the experience. You're being ambushed by an unexpected word or by an elephant falling out of the cupboard, whatever it is. I really like the idea of ambush. I like the idea of being caught off guard, surprised, uprooted, taken somewhere new. Theater can penetrate our numbness by getting us to fall in love and feel for characters or provoke outrage by witnessing cruelty, injustice, and selfishness. It can provide role models of who we want to be and who we don't want to be. Because it does not have to and shouldn't be politically correct, it has the potential to be a deeper exploration, opening up closed parts of thinkings or beliefs. Theater, like no other art form I know, happens in the present tense. It's a collaboration with the audience. Its form is revolutionary because although it's rehearsed sometimes, it changes every night based on the collaborators. It's spontaneous, and in this sense, it's dangerous. What theater does primarily is tell stories, as I've said, and please note that it can happen anywhere. In a field, in the Masai Mara, in Kenya, in a park on Wall Street, or a hotel lobby in Madison Square Garden. The theater has taught me not to make assumptions about people. Those who I thought would never respond to vaginas responded in ways I could never believe. We only know people on certain levels, but there are deeper levels that theater penetrates and opens up. I've seen priests defending vagina monologues and super lockdown prison wardens turning off the lights. We have no idea what can be catalyzed in people, what lives really deep inside them, just waiting, percolating resentments, longings, desires for revolts, what uprisings. Think Tahrir Square, think Occupy Wall Street. I think one of the things that has most moved me is how deeply people need to tell their stories, how deeply they need to be seen and heard and represented in the culture. I think how often people have been led to buy or pretend that the dominant narrative is their narrative when it has nothing to do with their narrative. And I think as long as we encourage and invite and provoke everyone to tell their story, we begin to dissolve the dominant narrative, which is essentially a patriarchal, racist narrative that we are all living under. Everything begins with your story, particularly through its specificity, because as you get more specific in your story, it becomes more universal. I want to close with the Congo again because it lives in my heart. And I just said to you all earlier that I think My choice, and I can only share this for me, is in 5 years, I've been to the White House, I've been to Downing Street, I've been to the Canadian Parliament, I've been to the French Ministry, I've been to the Secretary General, I've been to the Security Council. I have been everywhere. And I really want to tell you, except for the European Parliament, when vaginas were happening, I felt static deadness. As a matter of fact, I was giving a talk at the Security Council about literal stories of what was happening to the raped bodies of women in Congo, and I looked over and a Security Council member was texting someone. I now believe, not that I've lost complete faith in institutions, but I don't have a lot in them as they presently stand. I believe the change will come from people. I believe the change will come from the garden. I believe the change will come from the ground up. At the City of Joy, I see them rising and finding their strength and their voices, and they got this by telling their story, by telling their truth. This leads me to the fact that we need more theater. And we need to be more insistent, more brave, more outrageous, more daring, and disruptive. We need our passion to meet the madness of these times, and we need to stop being polite and stop apologizing for our intensity. We need to be misbehaved, frankly. Yeah, really. We need life to be theater, and we need theater to be life, and we need our efforts to save life to be as dramatic as the efforts that are going on to undo life. We need to go further. So I'm inviting all of you, and I'm urging all of you, and I hope every single person in this room will be an ambassador for a world-changing event that will occur on V-Day next year, V-Day 2013. We are doing an action rising called 1 Billion Rising. And what we are encouraging is you are all now the ambassadors of this. There's no brand. It's just 1 Billion Rising. Take it, run with it, it's yours. We're inviting every woman on the planet who has been raped or beaten, and every man and person who loves her, to walk out of your job, to walk out of your school, to walk out of your home, to walk out, put down your tools, put down your job, put down whatever it is you are doing, and to get your posse. And it can be in a church, it can be in a square, it can be in a stadium. I was just in Sydney where I launched this campaign, and at the end hundreds of women came up, and the Aboriginal women came up and they were like, we already have the stadium. We're beginning with Whitney. We're dancing to I'm Every Woman. It was amazing. And they said it's a 5,000-seat stadium. We got the footballers too. They're coming also. So the idea is to go where you go, or to think bigger and go, I'm going to get a stadium. I'm going to be that bold. But to go with your posse, and once you walk out, to dance. And the idea is that we're going to dance, and we're going to begin to dance in every part of the world, in every place of the world, with every woman and man in the world who wants the violence against women and girls to end. And I promise you that if we get 1 billion people to do that in one day, the world will change. All it requires is your faith that it's possible, and your willingness to be an ambassador of this idea and to spread it everywhere you go. We don't want any money. We don't want donations. We want people to dance and strike, to strike and dance and rise, strike and dance and rise, and to create a global energy that is theatrical and so powerful, it begins to break through this patriarchal box that has consumed us and destroyed us and kept us prisoners forever. The time is now. We can't wait another 5 more years, where another country of women perishes, where another 5-year-old girl's vagina is destroyed. The time is now, and it's up to us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. 1 billion rising! And on March 26th, there's going to be a wonderful performance of a memory, a monologue, a rant, and a prayer at the Lyric Theater. So everybody come. I'm also going to close. Can I read you a monologue? Yeah, okay, all right. And I'm doing this tonight for Jude, and for Lynn, my buddies, and for Monique and Rosanna. and for all of you. And for all of you who are going to become refusers and make sure that 1 billion women and men rise up. It's called Refuser. From the Lebanese mountains to the Kenyan village of El Doret, we are practicing self-defense. Versed in karate, tai chi, judo, and kung fu, we are no longer surrendering to our fate. Now we are the ones who walk our girlfriends home from school, and we don't do it with macho. We do it with cool. Our mothers are the pink sari gang fighting off the drunken men with rose-pointed fingers and sticks in Uttar Pradesh. The Peshmerga women in the Kurdish mountains with barrettes in their hair and AK-47s instead of pocketbooks. We are not waiting anymore to be taken and retaken. We are the Liberian women sitting in the African sun blockading the exits until the men figure it out. We are the Nigerian women, babies strapped to our back, occupying the oil terminals of Chevron. We are the women of Kerala who refuse to let Coca-Cola privatize our water. We are Cindy Sheehan showing up without a plan. We are all those who forfeited husbands, boyfriends, and dates because we were married to our mission. We know love comes from all directions and in many forms. We are Malala Joya, who spoke back to the Afghan lawyer Jirga and told them they were raping warlords, and she kept speaking even when they kept trying to blow up her house. And we are Zoya, whose radical mother was shot dead when she was only a child, so she was fed on revolution, which is stronger than milk. And we are the ones who kept and loved our babies, even though they have the faces of our rapists. We are the girls who stopped cutting ourselves to release the pain, and we are the girls who refuse to have our clitoris cut and give up our pleasure. We are Rachel Corrie, who couldn't move away from the Israeli tank, Aung San Suu Kyi, who now smiles because she finally left her room, Anne Frank, who survives because she wrote down her story. We are Netta Sultani, gunned down by a sniper in the streets of Tehran as she voiced a new freedom and way. We are Asma Mahfouz from the April 6th movement in Egypt, twittering and uprising. We are the women riding the high seas to offer needy women abortions on ships. We are women documenting the atrocities underneath our burqas. We are 17 and living for a tree, in a year in a tree, and laying down in the forest to protect wild oaks. We are out at sea interrupting the whale murders. We are freegans, vegans, and we are trans. Mainly, we are refusers. We don't accept your world, your war, your rules. We don't accept your cruelty and unkindness. We don't believe some need to suffer for others to survive, or there isn't enough to go around, or that corporations are the best and only economic arrangement. And we don't hate boys, okay? That's another bullshit story. We are refusers, but we crave kissing. We don't want to do anything before we're ready, but it could be sooner than you think. And we get to decide, and we are not afraid of what is pulsing through us. It makes us alive. Don't deny us, criticize us, infantilize us. We don't accept checkpoints, air raids, blockades. We are obsessed with learning. From the barren tsunami beaches of Sri Lanka, in the desolate, smelly remains of the lower ninth, buried under the rubble and debris of Port-au-Prince, we want school. We want school. We want school. We know if you plan too long, nothing happens, and things get worse, and that everything is found in the action. And instinctively, we get the scariest thing isn't dying, but not trying at all. And when we finally have our voice and come together, when we let ourselves gather the knowledge, when we stop turning on each other but direct our energy towards what matters, when we stop worrying about our skinny-ass stomachs or too frizzy hair or fat thighs, when we stop caring about pleasing and making everyone so incredibly happy, we got the power. If Janis Joplin was nominated the ugliest man on her campus, and they sent Angela Davis to jail, if Simone Weil had manly virtues and Joan of Arc was hysterical, if Bella Abzug was eminently obnoxious and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf is considered scary, if Arundhati Roy is totally intimidating and Rigoberto Menchu is pathologically intense, call us hysterical then. Fanatical, eccentric, delusional, intimidating, eminently obnoxious, militant, bitch, freak, tattoo me, witch, give us our broomsticks and potions on the stoves, because we are the girls who aren't afraid to cook. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I am not going to sum up the unsummable. I'm just going to say Eve Ensler rocks. So let's say it one more time for Eve Ensler.